From the outside, Daniel and Rebecca Green lived a life many people envied. Their home sat neatly in the middle of a quiet suburban street, where children rode bicycles until dusk and neighbors waved to one another without hesitation. The Green household looked tidy, the lawn trimmed, the front porch decorated with seasonal flowers. On weekends, they could often be seen entertaining guests, grilling in the backyard, or chatting with passers-by, as if they had no worries in the world. People who knew them only casually believed they were the type of couple that had it all figured out. Daniel worked long hours with a construction company, managing projects that gave him a steady income and a reputation for reliability. Rebecca, meanwhile, was a nurse whose gentle personality and compassion made her well-liked both by patients and co-workers. Together, they seemed to form a balanced team, a husband and wife who fit the mold of suburban happiness. But inside the home, things were not as harmonious as they appeared. Over time, Rebecca had grown distant, her energy depleted not only by long hospital shifts, but also by the growing weight of her marriage. Daniel, once attentive and playful, had become possessive and controlling. He wanted to know where she was at all times and often grew agitated if she was late returning home. Rebecca kept much of her frustration to herself, unwilling to draw attention to their problems. But the signs were there. If anyone had looked closely, she was quieter, less likely to join neighborhood gatherings unless she had to, and her once warm smile appeared forced. Daniel noticed these changes, but instead of addressing them with openness, he grew more suspicious. At night, he would glance at her phone, when she left it unattended, scrolling through text messages and social media posts, hoping to find something that would explain the distance between them. Often, he found nothing, yet he still convinced himself that something was being hidden from him. His suspicions fueled late-night arguments that ended in silence the following day, the tension lingering unspoken between them. Rebecca longed for space and peace, while Daniel craved control and certainty. Their marriage, once built on affection, had turned into an invisible battlefield, where both silently resented each other in different ways. To outsiders, the cracks were invisible. At barbecues or family events, they played their roles seamlessly. Daniel would place an arm around Rebecca's shoulder, and she would smile just enough to look convincing. Neighbors admired their closeness without realizing how rehearsed it had become. Even Rebecca's co-workers rarely suspected much, attributing her occasional exhaustion or distracted state to the demands of nursing. The couple had mastered the art of appearing stable, though the foundation of their relationship was weakening rapidly. Daniel carried an increasing sense of unease wherever he went. He felt her slipping away, though he could not prove it, and this fear began to consume him. Each day, he looked for evidence that Rebecca was hiding something, and each day his anxiety deepened. He started noticing little details that might have meant nothing to someone else, the way she lingered too long on her phone after work, the new clothes she had bought without mentioning them, or the distant look in her eyes when he tried to engage her in conversation. Each sign added to the narrative he was building in his mind, a narrative where Rebecca was no longer the faithful wife he believed she should be. Rebecca, meanwhile, had grown used to walking on eggshells around him. She avoided sharing her thoughts openly, worried that Daniel would twist her words into accusations. She threw herself deeper into her work, volunteering for longer shifts or overtime whenever possible, not just for the paycheck, but for the reprieve it gave her from the tension at home. Her co-workers admired her dedication, never realizing that the hospital was her sanctuary, the place where she felt more herself than within her own marriage. Their lives moved forward in this fragile balance, a facade maintained for the world while both carried private storms inside. Daniel's restless nights often ended with him sitting in front of his computer, long after Rebecca had gone to bed. He claimed it was work stress, but in truth, he was consumed by a growing obsession to uncover what he believed his wife was hiding. One evening, driven by the same gnawing suspicion that had followed him for months, he opened a dating app out of curiosity. He never expected what he saw. The moment he typed in a few filters and locations, his breath caught in his throat. There, among the profiles, was a face he knew better than anyone else. Rebecca's photo appeared on the screen, her smile bright, her posture confident, but the name listed was not her own. Beneath the picture was a short bio describing her as adventurous, fun, and ready for new beginnings. For Daniel, it felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. He stared at the profile for minutes that felt like hours, reading and rereading every word. Her interests, the carefully chosen photographs, even the playful tone in her description. It all seemed like a betrayal wrapped in casual words. Anger and disbelief surged through him in waves. He wanted to believe it was fake, some coincidence or a cruel prank. But the more he studied the images, the more certain he became that this was Rebecca. She had taken those photos herself, some of them in their own home, without his knowledge. What stung most wasn't just the existence of the profile, but the message it sent. She was presenting herself to strangers as available, as if their marriage meant nothing. From that moment on, Daniel could not look at his wife the same way. Every time she left the house, he imagined her meeting someone she had connected with online. Every time she came home late from the hospital, he pictured her laughing with another man. He did not confront her immediately. Instead, he began checking the profile daily, watching for updates. Sometimes the bio changed slightly, other times a new picture appeared. To Daniel, each update was further proof that she was actively seeking a new life beyond him. What Rebecca may have intended as harmless exploration, he interpreted as undeniable evidence of betrayal. His obsession grew darker as the days passed. He memorized the times when she appeared online, noting them down, comparing them to her work schedule. He convinced himself that the moments when her activity didn't line up with her shifts were times she was with someone else. The notebook he kept hidden in the garage filled with these observations, a twisted ledger of imagined deceit. What once might have been a misunderstanding hardened into an absolute belief that Rebecca was cheating. The discovery began to consume his thoughts during every hour of the day. At work, he struggled to focus, his mind drifting back to the profile. When coworkers spoke to him, he answered absent-mindedly, distracted by the storm brewing inside him. At night, while Rebecca slept, he scrolled through the app in the glow of his phone, seething at strangers who liked her pictures or commented on her profile. Each new notification made him feel as though invisible hands were pulling his wife further and further away. Instead of searching for clarity, Daniel fed his paranoia. He avoided speaking to Rebecca directly, fearing she would lie to him, and instead chose to build his own narrative from the fragments he saw online. This narrative was far more dangerous than the truth. He began thinking not of solutions but of punishment, of ways to make her pay for humiliating him. His emotions shifted rapidly between sadness and rage, until anger became the only thing he could feel. Rebecca, unaware of the storm gathering around her, continued her daily routine. She came home exhausted, carrying groceries or paperwork, often too tired to even notice Daniel's cold stares. She assumed his distance was simply a phase or a reaction to stress at work. Never once did she suspect that he had uncovered the profile she had created. To her, it was harmless, something she rarely checked, a fleeting attempt at distracting herself from the weight of her reality. To Daniel, it was a declaration of war. What he saw on that screen became the single defining truth in his mind, erasing years of marriage and memories. The man who had once loved his wife, now looked at her as a stranger living under his roof, someone who had deceived him in the worst possible way. And while Rebecca slept peacefully, unaware of the danger, Daniel lay awake night after night, quietly shaping a plan that would change both of their lives forever. Daniel's discovery of the profile became the turning point where suspicion transformed into obsession. Once he convinced himself that Rebecca was betraying him, he couldn't let it go. He began monitoring her every move, convinced that if he paid close enough attention, he would catch her slipping. He left for work earlier than usual, but circled back to watch her leave the house, noting the exact time she pulled out of the driveway. Some mornings he parked a block away from the hospital, just to see her car in the lot, making sure she was really where she said she was. Each confirmation that she was at work should have calmed him, but instead it fueled his paranoia. If she wasn't lying about her shifts, then she must have been meeting someone during her breaks, or on the nights when she claimed to stay late. In his mind, every possibility pointed to betrayal. Rebecca, tired from 12-hour shifts, didn't notice the car that occasionally lingered across the street from the hospital, or the way Daniel's questions became more precise. She only felt his moodiness grow heavier. At home she moved carefully, cooking dinner or folding laundry in silence, feeling his eyes on her. The tension was suffocating. She thought about confronting him, asking outright why he seemed so distrustful, but she feared it would only spark another argument. Daniel's obsession didn't stop at surveillance. He began searching through their home for proof, going through her purse when she showered, checking receipts, even scrolling through her emails when she left her laptop open. He found nothing conclusive, but every absence of evidence only deepened his conviction that she was skilled at hiding the truth. In his eyes, the lack of proof wasn't innocence. It was strategy. The anger built in him like a pressure cooker. He felt mocked, humiliated, and powerless. At work, he lashed out at co-workers for minor mistakes. At home, he slammed cabinets or stormed out of the room when Rebecca spoke too casually about her day. Friends began to notice his absence from weekend gatherings, but Daniel offered no explanation. His world had narrowed to one purpose: exposing Rebecca and regaining control over a life he believed she was trying to dismantle. One evening, he drove past a gun shop he had seen countless times before. Normally, it would never have crossed his mind to go inside. But that night the thought stuck. He told himself it was for protection. After all, break-ins weren't unheard of in nearby towns. The story he built sounded rational enough to quiet any doubts. He walked out with a handgun, carefully boxed and tucked under his arm. He stored it in a locked case in the garage, telling himself it was only a precaution, though deep down he knew the truth was darker. From that moment, the weapon became part of his fantasy. When he lay awake at night, unable to sleep, he pictured scenarios where he confronted Rebecca with the truth. Each imagined confrontation ended violently. He rehearsed the steps in his mind: where he would stand, what he would do, how quickly it would be over. At first the thoughts disturbed him, but the more he entertained them, the more they became normal, even comforting. He began to crave the certainty that action would bring, the relief of ending the torment of suspicion. Rebecca remained unaware of how far things had escalated. She was too focused on her demanding job, her patience, and the exhaustion that consumed her after every shift. She thought the strain in their marriage was painful but temporary, something they might work through if time allowed. She didn't know that Daniel had already crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The distance between them was no longer just emotional. It had become dangerous, a quiet countdown ticking away in Daniel's mind. Each time he saw her smile at her phone, each time she returned home late, each time he imagined her with someone else, the clock in his head ticked faster. He told himself he was preparing, that one day soon the truth would come out, and he would finally do what had to be done. His paranoia had stopped being suspicion. It had become certainty, and certainty in Daniel's mind meant action was inevitable. The day it happened began like any other, with sunlight spilling across the quiet street, and neighbors going about their routines. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks, a few people mowed their lawns, and the sound of birds carried through the air. It was the kind of afternoon where nothing seemed out of place, where life unfolded in predictable rhythms. But for Daniel, nothing about the day felt ordinary. He had already made his decision. The weapon was tucked beneath his jacket, and the plan he had rehearsed countless times was ready to unfold. Every step he took that afternoon carried a grim sense of purpose. He waited at the side of the house, hidden from view. From where he stood, he could hear faint laughter down the street, the sound of a neighbor's sprinkler clicking back and forth, and his own heartbeat thudding in his chest. His hands shook, not from hesitation, but from the anticipation of what he had convinced himself was justice. He believed he had been betrayed, humiliated, made into a fool. Now he thought it was time to reclaim control, to show her that the life she had tried to build behind his back would end here, in the open, for everyone to see. Rebecca's car pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching softly over the gravel. She stepped out, balancing grocery bags against her hip, tired but calm, unaware of the danger waiting just a few feet away. To her, it was another long day finally behind her, another evening she would spend putting away groceries and preparing for tomorrow's shift. She did not see him until he was already moving toward her, emerging from the side of the house like a shadow breaking free. The gun was in his hand before she could even register what was happening. Without a word, he raised it and pulled the trigger. The crack of the shot ripped through the peaceful neighborhood, louder than anyone could have imagined. Rebecca dropped to the ground, groceries spilling across the driveway, cans rolling onto the sidewalk, fruit scattering into the street. A scream echoed from across the road as a neighbor froze in horror, unable to look away. Chaos erupted instantly. Children screamed and ran toward their houses. Parents rushed outside, and voices shouted for someone to call the police. But Daniel was deaf to it all. His eyes were locked on Rebecca, his breathing heavy, his face twisted with a mixture of rage and emptiness. He stepped closer and fired again, the sound echoing against the walls of nearby homes. Rebecca's body lay motionless, her groceries still scattered, the bright red of tomatoes rolling across the concrete a chilling reminder of the sudden violence. The neighborhood became a blur of panic. People hid behind hedges, doors slammed shut, and a few brave souls shouted at Daniel to stop. No one dared approach him. They could see the gun still in his hand, the way he stood over her like a man who had already given up everything. Sirens were faint at first, but they grew louder with each passing second, racing toward the scene. For Daniel, time seemed suspended. He did not run. He did not hide. He stood in the driveway as if rooted to the spot, his chest rising and falling, the weight of what he had done sinking in slowly. He had imagined this moment countless times, but in his fantasies it brought him satisfaction, a sense of closure. Instead, what filled him now was emptiness, a hollow silence inside that no act could erase. He looked down at his wife, at the life that had been his for so many years, and realized there was no turning back. By the time the police cars screeched to a stop, lights flashing across the street, the entire neighborhood had been transformed into a scene of horror. Officers rushed out with weapons drawn, shouting commands. But Daniel did not resist. He dropped the gun to the ground and raised his hands slowly, his eyes still fixed on the body at his feet. Neighbors watched from behind windows and hedges, their once quiet street now scarred forever by the memory of violence. What had begun as an ordinary afternoon had turned into a nightmare in just a matter of seconds. A woman who had spent her life helping others as a nurse was gone, her future stolen in front of those who had known her as a kind neighbor and friend. And a man who had once seemed like a devoted husband now stood revealed as her killer, consumed by jealousy and obsession. The perfect suburban picture had shattered completely, replaced by a truth so horrific that no one on that street would ever forget what they had witnessed. Police swarmed the quiet suburban street, their flashing lights casting red and blue reflections across windows and cars. Neighbors huddled together on lawns, still shaken, whispering in disbelief about what they had just witnessed. Officers secured the scene quickly, pushing back onlookers and marking the driveway with yellow tape. Rebecca's body lay on the front steps, covered hastily by a sheet, the spilled groceries still scattered around her. The peaceful neighborhood had been transformed into a crime scene, the kind of image people usually saw on the news, not outside their own homes. Daniel stood motionless, his hands cuffed behind his back, his expression empty. He did not fight when police grabbed him, did not protest as he was pushed into the back of a patrol car. He stared out through the window, but not at the crowd or the flashing lights. His gaze was fixed firmly on the spot where Rebecca had fallen, as if his mind could not process the distance between what he had imagined and what had actually happened. For weeks, he had fantasized about this moment, expecting relief, closure, or some form of victory. Instead, there was nothing. Just a void where anger had once burned. The neighbors who had known them for years could hardly believe what they had seen. Some recalled the barbecues, the smiles, the small talk about work and family. Others remembered the way Daniel and Rebecca would wave during evening walks. They had appeared like any other married couple, perhaps quieter than some, but never the type to cause suspicion. To realize that behind those walls tension had been boiling into something so violent left everyone unsettled. The street that once felt safe and ordinary now seemed fragile, as if danger had always been lurking closer than they thought. At the station, detectives began piecing together the chain of events. They interviewed neighbors, co-workers, and family members, building a picture of a marriage that had been crumbling long before the final explosion. The story of Daniel discovering the dating profile quickly surfaced, becoming the central piece of his explanation. He insisted he had been betrayed, that his wife had been preparing to leave him, and that he had been pushed beyond his limits. But as investigators dug deeper, a disturbing truth emerged. The profile Rebecca had created was not part of a secret affair. Instead, it was tied to an online support group, where individuals in unhappy marriages explored ways of expressing themselves anonymously. Her photos were real, her words heartfelt, but she had not been arranging secret meetings or living a double life. She had been reaching out into a digital space where she could share feelings she had been unable to express at home. The profile was not a doorway into infidelity, but an outlet for loneliness. Daniel had taken what he saw and twisted it into a narrative that fit his fears, never questioning whether his assumptions might be wrong. In court, prosecutors painted him as a man driven by jealousy and control, someone who had allowed his insecurities to grow into obsession. Witnesses recounted how he had grown distant and volatile, how his behavior had shifted in the months leading up to the shooting. The defense argued that he was a broken man pushed over the edge by emotional betrayal, but the evidence of planning, the surveillance, the notebook of her activities, and the purchase of the gun, made it clear this had not been a moment of passion. It had been deliberate. The jury took little time to decide his fate. Daniel was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He showed little reaction when the verdict was read, sitting quietly as if already detached from the world around him. For those who had loved Rebecca, justice felt hollow. No sentence could bring back the woman who had devoted her life to helping others, or erase the horror of how she died. Her funeral was attended by co-workers, patients' families, and neighbors who still struggled to understand how something so brutal could happen in their quiet community. The street eventually returned to its routines, but the memory of that afternoon lingered. Every time someone passed the greenhouse, they remembered the sirens, the screams, the sound of gunfire echoing across the neighborhood. The tragedy served as a chilling reminder of how quickly suspicion and obsession could destroy lives. What began as a misunderstanding born from loneliness had ended with a woman's life cut short, and a man trapped forever in the consequences of his own delusions. The perfect couple had become a cautionary tale, their story retold not with admiration, but with shock and sorrow.